Howdy, my name is Callum, also known as Northern Dice, and today I'm going to be reviewing the 1 to 5 player game Moonrakers by IV Studios. Moonrakers takes about 60 minutes to an hour and a half to play, and is a game centred on hand management, deck building, a lot of negotiation, and a fair amount of semi-cooperation. The game centres on players taking on the roles of pilots trying to defend a base and earn as much prestige as possible. And that's done by doing contracts, and contracts cannot be done alone all the time, so you will need to work together and against each other in order to claim the victory. This copy of Moonrakers was sent to us by IV Studios specifically for the purpose of unbiased review. As always, we aren't paid for any media we produce, and all opinions given are entirely our own based on our own experiences. So here we have Moonrakers set up for a 3-player game. All players start on the exact same footing. The only difference across players is their board aesthetics, which match the ship colour that they have got. An example here, we've got the green player who has got a picture of their ship there. Purple player would have a picture of the purple ship in the centre, reflecting the little token that they've got to represent them. The aim of the game is to gain prestige, and you gain prestige by completing contracts or by completing objectives. Players need to work both cooperatively and against each other in order to do that. The objectives that you need to complete are quite often about set collection or doing something in a mission, whereas the contracts are about completing missions to earn that prestige alongside, quite often, parts for ships and money as well. At its core, Moonrakers is a deck builder because what you need to do is build a deck of cards that will best be able to tackle the most contracts in order to earn you most prestige. But there is a lot of heavy emphasis on that negotiation and cooperation and teamwork because some of these contracts require a lot, and I mean a lot, in terms of matching different symbols and being able to play certain cards. To the point where there are certain ones where you are destined to need someone else's help. And you're going to need to encourage people to join you by negotiating on what rewards from each contract will be given. Now, in the early game, it's very easy to get carried away with being very fair and very easygoing. But as you get towards the top of this top of this prestige track, these contracts are going to become more and more coveted by players, and you're going to get greedier and greedier. So that cooperation, 9 times out of 10, turns into semi-cooperation, into just outright betrayal. Because you need to cooperate with players and say, what can you bring to the table? I'm going to bring this person and this person. As the cards get played, someone might turn around and say, you know what, actually, I'm going to play a dud card in order to just absolutely mess this up. And the risk-taking there is all about who you trust. And of course, because this isn't a game that wipes the slate clean and that human element is always going to be present, you're going to remember who did what, and it makes you very, very untrustable, or it makes you overly trustable. But I think that really plays into the player interaction of this game. So deck building and negotiation at its actual peak. There are the contracts that you need to complete, but you don't ever collect them per se. You just sort of finish them by playing the cards. And in some elements, it can also be classed as a bit of a tableau builder because of the way the cards are played. You never just play a card and it's done. You get one action per turn, and playing certain cards grants you more actions, playing certain cards grants you more cards, but they all count towards these contract objectives if they are required. Now, the way the game makes this more variable for players is the way that they can improve their ships, and that is done through both upgrades and through the crew that they can acquire. Now, across here along the top, we have got on the left hand side all the things that players will be aiming to gain. We have the ship parts at the bottom, and we have the crew at the top. Now, crew do give you special effects when played, and they just go into your deck the same as all the other cards that you'll gain. Whereas ship parts go onto your actual shipboard and have continuous effects that quite often impact the way that you'll take on a contract. In example, it says here on this one, play your first shield without using an action, which can be fantastic if you are just one shield short of completing an objective. Another one says requirements for reactors are 1 less. Your first damage played counts as 3 damage. It makes it so that you are more adaptable to a situation. But what they also do is they give you cards as well, which you add into your deck. Now, not always are they going to be the cards that you want, but these are going to be ship parts that are going to improve you tenfold. Now, the beautiful thing about this, or maybe the not so beautiful thing, is that if you were to replace a ship part, you don't lose the card out of your deck. So an example, you may gain 1 shield from this part that goes straight into your deck, but then if you replace that part, that shield card doesn't get removed from the deck. Now that sounds like a really no-brain deal. However, you've got to remember that as you're going, you're going to be wanting more and more specific things, and if you've got a deck that is clogged full of shields and you want attack cards, you're going to become very undesirable as a companion on any contract. Alongside that, quite often some of these ship parts give you dud cards, which are misses, which make you quite untrustable. The thing about these miss cards is they have absolutely zero purpose in terms of completing contracts. There are no contracts that require a miss card, but they are perfect to play as that betrayal because you get one action, and if your one action is to play that miss card, it means that you have ruined someone else's chances. Now, of course, these ship parts seem really desirable, and it almost overshadows the actual character cards, the crewman cards that you can gain, because they just become part of your deck and need to be dealt out to you to gain them. But what I didn't mention is that these crew cards quite often can be needed to complete contracts. There are 5 different things that contracts will need. You need attack, you need shields, you need thrusters, you need power, and you will need crew. Now, not every single contract will require all of those, and not every single contract will require the same quantity of those. Quite often, it depends on how difficult the mission is. They'll only ever require a maximum of 3 in a combination of. So you'll only ever need shields and power and crew. You wouldn't need the other 2. You can still play them, they just won't count towards that victory or towards the actual totals. But the crew give you those special effects on top of it, and your different ship parts also manage that as well, which gives you a lot of tangibility in terms of how you approach things. But it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be able to tackle everything. And what makes these contracts so difficult is not only the number of things they need, but also the risk entailed. Every single contract that goes above a certain level of 1 will include a hazard die. And hazard dice are how many prestige you will lose. There's nothing bad going to happen to your ship, you're not going to get destroyed, you don't get wiped, you don't ever have a reset moment. It is a case of you roll these dice to establish how much prestige you're going to lose. You can negate that by playing shields, but quite often, if you're required to roll all 4 of these, and you are going on this alone, well, the max die result is 2, so that's 8 prestige you could be losing if you mess this up. And failing the contract doesn't negate the loss of prestige. Once those dice are rolled and the contract has begun, it is a case of, even if you fail, you are still losing that prestige. And even if you win, you still lose that prestige. So if you're going for a contract that gives you 4 prestige and you're losing 8, if anything, you've taken a contract for a 4 prestige loss, which is a bit silly in all honesty, but it keeps you on your toes and forces you to start cooperating with these 2 players to either side of you. As much as you don't trust them and know full well that they are just trying to get to the victory as fast as you are, they are going to be your best allies. And the way that works is in the way the game allows you to negotiate things. So contracts themselves come with 3 different types of rewards. They give you money, they give you prestige, and they can give you a random upgrade. Now the random upgrade is just top card of the parts deck, and they pick it up and they just slap it straight into their ship. The money can be divided equally among players. It can be divided however you want. If you decide that you want to just give 1 coin to one player, 3 to another, and keep 4 for yourself, that's absolutely fine. Everybody needs to agree to it, and if someone's got a bit of a poor deal, they probably won't want to finish your contracts for you. With that as well, people can make it a little bit more interesting and a little bit more appealing to give them more rewards if they agree to roll the hazard die, because you can distribute those as well. And on top of that, there's the prestige, the most coveted thing in the game, the one that everybody wants in order to win. If you have got 6 prestige available and you aren't going split down the centre of 2 for you, 2 for me, 2 for you, you know full well that someone needs to start pulling their weight, or someone is either a detriment to the actual mission itself. In example, if I were to take a contract that required 4 shields, and I'm giving 3 of them and this player's giving 1, the player who's giving no shields, chances are, isn't going to get picked. But if they've got some other things to bring to the table, or they're willing to roll those hazard die, it might put us in a position where we're more inclined to include them. But then it's that negotiation element of how do you value the risk versus reward? And more importantly, just because it's your turn, do you actually want anybody who might be at chance of winning to be part of your victory? Or do you want to sort of, I don't know, encourage other players to not include them? It becomes a very social game at its peak. And I think that's the beautiful thing about this. Because as much as you've got your deck building, you've got the contracts, you're almost building a tableau as you're trying to get through things, the core element that this game drives is that socialisation, that communication, that need to make sure that everybody knows what you believe is fair, and also arguing for that fairness. Because at the end of the day, you are in competition with these players, and as much as they are going to help you finish some of these contracts, they aren't going to help you finish those contracts to help you win. They're doing it so that they get something out of it. It's a very selfish game, and that's what I love about it. The actual fact that you need to desperately claw at all those rewards, really push for that fairness, really push for that extra coin, really make it so that your one little bit of effort outshines everybody else's. Having a silver tongue in this game is going to do one or two things. It's either going to get you a lot of prestige very quickly and guarantee you a win, or it's going to prove you to be quite the snake and make it so everybody doesn't trust you. And in either result, it makes for an extremely engaging, a really almost political argument of a game. And I think that is superb. So just a quick couple of notes on the actual solo and two-player variant. Now when you go for these, you will have almost a dud player deck made using a couple of cards set out as instructed by the game manual. And they become mercenaries that you can hire by spending coins. And for every card of theirs you want to use, it's an increasing incrementally. So one card would be 1 coin, then the next card would be a further 2 coins, the next card would be a further 3 coins. And it works to balance that out. But we found that, without making it sound negative, the solo and two-player experience was completely overshadowed by the 3, 4 and 5 player experience. Having those players actually there able to argue with you is far superior in every single respect, because the game thrives on that player interaction. By having one player be removed and replaced with that deck of cards, you almost make the game easier to win, because you don't have to have that element of chance that someone will mess you up, but you also don't have that risk of having to sacrifice large quantities of, well, the really, really important resources necessary for victory and to get you closer and closer to that win. Don't get me wrong, we really did enjoy the two-player mode, and I quite enjoyed the solo mode when I gave it a whirl, but maybe I did it in the wrong order. I had already played a 4 or 5 player game before I tried the solo, and because of that I went in with the high expectations and hope and hype built up by that negotiation, by that interaction, by those arguments and the absolute anarchy of people almost having full-blown tantrums across the table because someone screwed them over in the last second, and just the look of glee on that person's face knowing that they had done that. It was phenomenal, and it made for such a fantastic experience that when we played it with just 2 players and it was just me against my partner, having that mercenary deck was almost that safety net of, well, you're not going to negotiate with me because you know how close I am to winning, so I will just use this strip of cards to my advantage and go for the contracts nice, slow and steady to win. Again, it is still fun, we did enjoy it, but because we had already had the full shebang of a 4 or 5 player game, it meant the 2 and 1 player experience was really diluted in comparison. If you are looking for this as a solo game, I think because you will want to play this with more players and you will have that memory of that, it will always be overshadowed in such a heavy capacity. It's a good, really fun, enjoyable and engaging 2-player and solo game, but it's a far better 3, 4, 5 player game in every single way. All players start on the exact same footing in this game. Everybody starts with 3 reactors, 2 thrusters, 2 shields, 1 miss, and 2 damage at value 1 each. And it's important that they're value 1 because they do come in increments of 1, 2 and 3. And what players do to kick off is everybody collects that, they'll give their deck a bit of a shuffle, and they'll deal 5 cards to themselves. Now anytime anybody starts a contract, partakes in a contract, or is anything to do where they'll play cards, they will always get rid of their hand and get 5 new cards. So if we have our starting hand here, as you can see, we have got a very rubbish hand. And the reason I say it's a rubbish hand is because what we don't have is any of those reactor cards. Now reactor cards are the ones that allow you to play more than 1 action. These cards do not. This one will block 1 hazard, and miss is just a complete dud. And a damage card will do +1 damage to any contract we take on, again, and the thruster will allow you to draw 2 more cards. But because you can only do 1 action to start off with, it means that we are going to be in a position where we can't do anything. So on our turn, we have two options. We can either take a contract, fly off, take it on, earn the rewards, and move on. We could also take on a contract, negotiate with other players and say, it's my turn, I'm not able to contribute much, is there anybody who would like some freebies? Or we can do the stay at base action. Now stay at base allows us to just take a single coin. It allows us to draw two objectives from the objective deck and keep one. And it also allows us to discard one of these contracts and replace it. The reason you'd want to do that is because if you know that another player has got their eye on a big contract, one that will get them the win and one you know they could do, for your turn you could skip your turn to remove it to prevent them from getting the win. Which seems very cold and calculated, but it's entirely part of that negotiation element of that game. If they're not willing to include you, or you know full well that they can complete it on their own, you want to hinder them the best you can. So let's just example say that one player has chosen this contract and they are going to choose some allies. There are 1, 2, 3 coins available from this contract, so they are going to try and take it on to earn these coins. But they know full well that they can't get one of these things, so they might negotiate, and you may be saying, this player gets 1 coin for helping, I get the other 2 coins. Which, you know, it's fair, it's your turn, it's understandable. So then with that, what you do is you play your cards to the table and accumulate actions progressively. So you get 1 action, which is effectively 1 card play. After that, you need to either have made it so you've got more actions or be able to fulfill the contract. The way you get more actions is entirely through these cards, which are your reactor cards. They immediately give you +2 actions. And the way the game suggests, and the way we've best found it to do, is to cascade these actions down off of these cards to almost make a pyramid. So we've got +2 actions. So there's one of our other actions. We'll draw 2 cards from that. And then we've still got our other action on the other side. So from there, we're going to play another 2 actions. And then we may later on play another 2 actions. With that option to then just fill those spots down and around, cascading it down. Now, of course, we've finished that contract by that point. We didn't need to play any more cards, and you're not obliged to fulfill all those cards. But if you did roll one of these hazard die, and were at risk of losing a couple of prestige points, you'd want to be playing more shields. What I like the most about this almost cascading tableau effect that you play cards in is that you are able to do it simultaneously across all players. The game never at any points in the rules suggests that, and in fact says do it progressively, turn by turn. But because we like that argument, that negotiation, and also the tension built within, you don't want to wait till the very last person for them to go, haha, I've played a miss, everybody loses. You want to see it there and then. You want to see the action being, well, developed as it's played. And we found that the actual ability to be able to play this simultaneously meant that it was a lot more meaty and a lot more that you could get your teeth into. It also made it a lot more pacey. There's nothing worse than having a game that's so socially interactive that there's a risk that you could not have anything to do with it. If it's a 4-player game and 1 player doesn't get picked, they're going to sit about waiting for player 1, 2 and 3 to finish all of their tableaus to actually get this contract fulfilled. Play it simultaneously, that 4th player is sat there pretty knowing in 20 seconds it's going to be done, it's going to be the next player, and there's going to be more arguments to be had. With this as well, it helps it so you can see it very, very easily across all the things. There are a couple of elements where there are loopholes in the rules. So there are a couple of the crew cards that you can play. In example, not these ones, but you play those to your hand, and sometimes they can just immediately give you actions, and because of that, there are cards that are other crew actions which allow you to take cards back. And it becomes almost a loop of player cards to pick up that card, to player card, to pick up that card, and you accumulate an infinite number of actions. Now, as much as that doesn't guarantee that you are going to be in a position to play every single card, because you might not necessarily get the thrusters, or might not necessarily get the cards to pick up other cards, it does mean that you are in a risk of having one player just take forever burning through their deck, doing this long process that's overly drawn out. Now, we as a group developed this sort of system to identify when that was happening, and we'd say, look, it's a little bit on the cheeky side. Maybe there should be some sort of rule into so that you can't do that. But as much as it is limited that you can't do things infinitely, and that there is an actual objective to work towards, so you're not just going infinitely, there is that little element there. And I think it can be exploited by players. But in the same sense, it can be exploited in quite a positive sense, because if you've got the perfect deck to tackle a couple of these contracts, you might be in a position to turn around and say, I'm going to take that one on because I know that I'll be able to get all my deck out, which will complete that. And they fall through, and they play it all, and it all just works beautifully. And then there's that beauty for other players when they don't get the cards they want in their hand initially, it all falls through for them, and nothing happens. But you get a good chuckle out of it, and everyone gets a really good laugh. But yeah, this actual tableau system of playing your cards to get the actions to fulfill these contracts, we think is fantastic. We do wish that the rules said to do it simultaneously, but we found that doing simultaneous, no matter what, worked beautifully as well. I think the main thing for me with this game is the actual aesthetics itself, because everything seems to have its own little styling that keeps consistent within the Moonrakers theme, whilst also being incredibly unique and not like anything that I've ever seen before in a board game. So an example, straight away got the metal coins, which aren't easy to see against this light, but they are very much metal engraved. Remind me quite reminiscently of Zaya's coins, apart from they're not triangles, but their just styling is very cybernetic, very digital. And that actually fits into a lot of the other themings in the game as well, because a lot of the cards, including the characters themselves, have sort of a almost digital-esque old school video game vibe to them, where everything almost has a command prompt sort of feel, which seems quite a strange thing for any game to try and consistently have, but it does do it, because a lot of the things end in .txt. As example on this, you've got the miscellaneous .text on the little prompt card at the top here. We also have the on_your_turn.txt, and it fits into the vibe that you are almost the main controller of these ships, but you are almost programming them to do what you need them to do, which comes into that sort of tableau building element that you are programming the actions that you want to take, with one action being available at any one time. And it all feels a little bit odd at first, but it's quite charming when you get into the meat and bones of it, because it's so consistent across that you can't escape it. It's not a negative in itself by any measure, and if anything, I think it helps complement the game's overall aesthetic, but also its overall theme, because you're not just then some guys flying ships in space. You're trying to fill these contracts, you're almost like little mercenaries taking on jobs, but it makes it quite digital and quite computer-esque to the point where it almost feels, I dare say, like The Last Starfighter or something along those lines. What else is quite consistent across that theme is the actual rulebook as well, which is written very much in that form too. And a lot of the imagery and stylings from that do reflect that incredibly well. 90% of that book is entirely based around explaining what it's meant to do. The other 10% is either explanations or that theming being really grabbed hold of and just held in place. And it works so well to really demonstrate that to the player without being overbearing. Again, it's in part of that theme, and I find it quite charming myself. So final thoughts on Moonrakers. Well, as you can probably tell from the full review, we loved it. We loved every single bit of it. As I've previously said, the game thrives on that player interaction and that discussion. And because the game is set up in a way where you can actually play simultaneously, it means that the player interaction is frequent, it's constant, and it's always hitting you. Even sat there as a spectator to a couple of people doing a tableau, it means that you are going to be ready, raring and eager, because you can still see everything on the board available to you. You know what contracts are still going to be there for you to take. You know what you need to try and win. At no point are you ever left just sat doing nothing. As I previously mentioned as well, you can still take it turn by turn to do the actual fulfillment of contracts to make sure that everybody gets the grips of it, and that's to the game's benefit as well, because as much as I really enjoy that really pacey simultaneous play, it means that as you're teaching people you can demonstrate things really nicely, really slowly. And again, that rulebook does just explain it so well that it's near impossible to get wrong once you've had a good look through and had someone show you. The bit that you need to learn as you play is the negotiation and the balance in risk versus reward. It's very easy, we've found, that when you are in last place to just go for any contract with no risk, because no matter how many hazard die you have to roll, there is 0 prestige to lose, so you can't go negative. You're gonna just be hammering it. And I think that made it quite exciting to be in last place sometimes, because you only needed one incredibly lucky roll and one fantastically lucky set of cards that you'd built up in your deck to come out in your hand to be able to start clawing back that victory. In fact, one of my favourite memories is of that, where someone was in first place with 8 prestige and someone just got the best roll in the world and went from 0 to 6 prestige on a solo run because they had the deck of cards they wanted. In that same game, of course, they weren't able to deconstruct that deck and then were left with a lot of cards that they didn't need, which did mean that they were going to go for the loss, but at the same time, that is part of that risk versus reward as well. Knowing that when you are upgrading your ship, you are adding parts to it, you're getting those benefits. You might be removing some parts and replacing the benefits for better or more appropriate ones for the time, but the cards never disappear. Now, I didn't mention this earlier, but as the cards go into your deck, it's really hard to get rid of it, if not impossible quite often in some circumstances, which means that if you have clogged your deck full of a certain type of card, just because you needed it for an objective, for example, or it was just convenient at the time, or just by actual chance, you're then going to be getting a lot of it. And if you don't necessarily need that card as time goes on, or people know that you won't have anything but that, you're less likely to get chosen. And it means that you've got to be really considerate of how you balance those things out as well. I've already spoken about the aesthetics in great detail because I absolutely love it. I love that old school computer-esque of command prompt where everything looks like it is just a file that's popped up. And I think that also builds into that theme and aesthetic that you aren't in the ship, you're controlling it, and then you're inserting those commands using the cards because you get one action, you play a blue card to get 2 more actions, and then you build it up to build that tree of a tableau for your actions. But thematically as well, through the rulebook and just through little elements like the text in the rulebook and the text on the cards, it makes it really, really engaging. And being a bit of a geek, I can't deny that, but it was great fun. I had a good smile at that. It won't be appreciated by people everywhere or all people, but for me, it tickled my funny bone. I did enjoy that bit. But are there any areas where I feel like Moonrakers is lacking? And in all honesty, I would probably just say it's that deck deconstruction element. The fact that when you've got those cards in your deck, it's quite hard to get rid of them, if not impossible, and it often means that you're going to be cycling through cards that you might not necessarily want. The other thing that I do see as a detriment to it, but it's a detriment to all cooperation, semi-cooperation games, is that the game encourages you to build a history. No matter what happens, you're going to remember who betrayed, who did what, who is reliable and who's not. And because of that, it means that if you go out really nastily to start off with, people are going to remember. And with people remembering, it means it's going to become quite a lonely endgame for anybody who has been incredibly ruthless and cruel. In that same capacity, it does mean that people are more likely to argue with you about the level or amount of reward you're going to get if you're incredibly generous. You've got to remember that this is a you win on your own sort of game. You don't want to share any victories, and as it gets towards the top of that prestige track, people are going to be less and less friendly. It works in a really fun and exciting way, but there's no way to really wipe the slate clean other than that socialisation of we will wipe the slate clean, nobody's going to remember what happened 3 games ago where Dave screwed everybody over in the last turn. Everyone's going to remember what he did, and everyone's always going to live that through, and any time you open up Moonrakers, you will remember it. It'll make for a fantastic story, and it'll make for superb memories, and probably one of the reasons that you will love the game. But I tell you what, if you are a Dave, and you are that bloke who has screwed everyone over, and you're trying to turn over a new leaf, it's going to take a long old while. But as I said, that is a detriment to all cooperation and semi-cooperation games with any level of socialisation and verbal negotiation and contract making. If you are one to break contracts or just be a bit of a Dave, as I keep saying. No offence to anybody called Dave, of course, but if you are going to be that guy who intentionally screws people over, you are going to be that guy who is not chosen for a lot of contracts. I guess the final question to answer is, would I recommend this? And for me, it's a big no-brainer yes. I have loved this game since the moment I heard about it, and it ticked all the right boxes for me in terms of that socialisation. And because the experience we have had with it has been so positive, even with all the betrayals and even with all of the heartbreak in those last moments with prestige dice being hazard dice being rolled to lose prestige, it still sits really, really positively with me, and it is a game I will not say no to. The one thing I would say that, as always, would I recommend it for everybody? The answer is no. Because if you're not one who likes confrontation, if you're not one who likes any level of cooperation, and if you don't like people being able to stab each other in the back, this isn't for you. But I will say that with a little air on the side of caution, that don't rule this out as a no. Because realistically, there is always opportunity to claw back a victory. There is no player elimination in this, there is no ship destruction, there is no major loss. If you're at 0 prestige, you're in the best position to take massive risks with absolutely no actual risk involved. In the same way, the game encourages you to be a little bit more cautious towards the end, and that does mean that the victory from 0 to 8 prestige might be very, very quick, but then from 8 to 10 prestige might be incredibly slow because you're being so cautious. And I think that also gives players the opportunity to play catch-up. But that's again dependent on the cards that come out, how you play, and how the players interact with you. But yeah, I would honestly recommend this, and I'd highly recommend it for groups of gamers, not necessarily families, but gaming groups who enjoy that element of semi-cooperation and discussion, and that heavy player interaction element. As always, thank you ever so much for sticking around for my rambling review. I have loved every second of having this game on the table playing it, and I cannot wait to crack it open again and have another good opportunity to just argue with people about the most trivial of rewards, just knowing that I've got a plan in my head on how I'm going to screw everybody over. Thank you ever so much for sticking around for this long. I will catch you next time.